Not every farewell announces itself. Some arrive gently, like an echo from somewhere far back in time. This is a tribute from Hollywood where we honor the American stars we've recently lost, alongside beloved figures from around the world. If this tribute moves you, sharing it helps ensure their legacies live on. David Allan Coe passed away at 86. He was never the kind of artist you could easily categorize. Too rough around the edges, too honest for comfort, the sort of voice that didn't wait for anyone's approval. The news arrived without ceremony. No fanfare, just a quiet weight settling over those who spent long evenings with his music drifting through the room. If you lived through the 1970s, you remember when his name started turning up everywhere. His songs traveled from jukebox to jukebox, landing in roadside diners, late-night bars, and everywhere in between. He wrote more than 280 songs, and they never had the smooth, calculated finish Nashville usually demanded. That's precisely why they endured. You Never Even Called Me by My Name didn't just get played, it got remembered. He came from Akron, Ohio, but his sound didn't belong to any single place. If anything, it belonged to all of them. There was always the feeling that he'd lived through more than he ever admitted. Behind the persona was a man who never quite fit the expected shape of things, and that refusal to conform mattered deeply, especially back then. He carried contradictions openly. Some people respected him for it. Others didn't. But nobody looked away. And now that voice has gone silent. The strange thing is, the songs don't age the way we do. You hear one years later and it feels just as immediate. But time keeps moving. And the world feels a little emptier knowing he's no longer out there somewhere, working on another line. Jim McBride passed away at 78. His name may not have been one everyone recognized immediately, but his songs, those you knew by heart. The news broke first through Nashville's inner circles before reaching the wider world. A fall at home, followed by complications. A quiet ending for a man whose work was anything but small. If you had the radio on in the early 1990s, you remember what Chattahoochee did to a summer afternoon. It wasn't just a hit song. It was a whole feeling, youth distilled into 3 minutes, something you understood without needing to explain. Jim McBride had a hand in writing that, along with dozens of others that carried the same unforced truth. He was part of Music Row during an era when Nashville still valued the story over the spectacle. Rooms full of legal pads, lukewarm coffee, someone noodling on a guitar in the background. That was his world. Not the stage, the craft. Everyone who worked alongside him seemed to say the same thing, he listened more than he spoke. He noticed what other people overlooked. And somehow, he turned those small observations into lines that outlasted decades. That's a rare thing. It was never easy. Now he's gone, and the oddly comforting part is that the songs haven't gone anywhere. They're still playing right now, in someone's car, on someone's radio. Maybe that's the closest any of us gets to staying. Johnny Rodriguez passed away at 73. For anyone tuned into country radio during the 1970s, his voice was immediately distinct, smooth on the surface, but carrying something deeper underneath. A kind of pride mixed with longing that was entirely his own. The confirmation came out of San Antonio, Texas. It arrived softly, as these things tend to do, no grand announcement, just a name that meant everything to a certain generation, suddenly spoken in the past tense. In the mid-70s, his music was inescapable. Ridin' My Thumb to Mexico. That's the way love goes. Songs that didn't feel manufactured, they just settled into your life naturally. For many listeners, he represented something larger than chart success. He was a Mexican-American artist standing at the very top of country music at a time when that meant more than people said aloud. He came from Sabinal, a small Texas town, and no matter how large the venues became, he seemed to carry that place inside him. There was always a sense he knew exactly who he was singing for. People who knew him offstage described someone quiet and grounded, with no interest in chasing attention. That quality made the music feel more authentic. And now that sound lives entirely in memory. It's strange how it works, you catch one of his songs by accident on an old station, and suddenly you're transported. Same roads, same feeling, same moment in time. Time doesn't ask. It just keeps moving. Don Schlitz passed away at 73. Not a face most people would recognize in a crowd, but if country music was part of your life in the 70s and 80s, his work was already woven through it. You just may not have known his name. Word spread out of Nashville, fast inside the industry, then slowly for the rest of the world. Because that's how it goes with songwriters. They work behind the curtain, and you only think to look for them when they're already gone. He wrote more than 20 #1 country songs. Let that settle for a moment. Not just popular songs, songs that defined whole chapters of American life. The Gambler, which Kenny Rogers recorded in 1978, didn't simply top charts. It entered the culture. Lines from it are still quoted today by people who couldn't tell you where they first heard them. That was Schlitz's particular genius. He didn't write lyrics that sounded like lyrics. He wrote wisdom that sounded like it had always existed, like something passed down rather than composed. He came out of Durham, North Carolina, and eventually found his way to Nashville when Music Row still ran on instinct, late hours, and cheap coffee. Guitars slightly out of tune, notebooks worn at the corners. That world formed him. And he shaped it right back. Those who knew him closely talked about his devotion to precision, the right word, the right pause, the weight of silence between lines. It shows in everything he left behind. He's gone now, but the work sits exactly where it always did, on the radio, in someone's memory, patient as ever. The spotlight didn't fall on him quite the same way anymore. Not because it had changed. Because he had. There he stood, center stage, still every inch Alan Jackson, but moving with a new deliberateness. A slight slowing that you might miss at first glance. But once you noticed it, it stayed with you. The crowd roared. People were on their feet, phones raised, some already blinking back tears before anything had been said. He gripped the microphone the way he always had, familiar, unhurried, like his hands knew exactly what to do even when the rest of him had to work a little harder. And when the singing began, the voice was still there. But the road had grown harder on the man carrying it. You could see it in the way he shifted his weight between verses, in the longer pauses, in the way his eyes moved across the audience, not scanning, but holding on. Like he understood something the crowd was only beginning to sense. For so many people in that room, Alan Jackson was never just a performer. He was Saturday mornings before the house woke up, a kitchen radio playing quietly, a drive down a highway that seemed to go on forever. He was the kind of husband who stayed through the hard parts, the kind of love that didn't collapse under pressure. He represented a version of America that felt solid. And something about that solidity was quietly shifting. He didn't say it outright. He didn't need to. There was a moment, easy to miss, just a breath too long between verses, when his hand tightened on the mic and the stage seemed to be drawing from him rather than lifting him. Alan Jackson didn't grow up learning how to walk away from things. Born in 1958 in Newnan, Georgia, a small town, 5 sisters, a home built out of a converted tool shed. No glamour, no fast tracks, just faith and the kind of quiet work ethic nobody writes songs about. Country music wasn't a career plan. It was just always there, in the air, in the trucks, in the conversations that nobody thought to write down. Nothing about where he started pointed toward stadium stages. And maybe that's why he never seemed to own them, even after decades beneath the lights. It always looked like borrowed time. And now that feeling carried something new, not like a concert, but like a gradual ending that hadn't yet been named. The signs were there in the spacing of the tours. Fewer cities. Longer stretches of quiet between dates, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from rest. Still, he kept showing up. Boots on, guitar ready, that same unhurried presence that never needed to prove anything. But his body had begun telling its own story. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a new resistance in ordinary movements, a recalibration of steps, a man quietly learning that the ground he'd spent his whole life walking had become less certain beneath him. When he finally named it, he did so without theater. Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. A condition most people had never encountered. It doesn't steal the voice or the mind. Instead, it works slowly, steadily, interfering with the signals between nerves and muscles, with the very control that someone like Allan depended on without ever thinking about it. The real difficulty wasn't that he could no longer sing. It was that simply getting to the place where he could sing was becoming a greater effort every time. He had been managing this quietly for years. No announcements, no dramatic reveals, just adaptation, continuation, the same approach he'd always taken. And that approach wasn't new. Life had tested him long before any medical diagnosis. His marriage to Denise had its own difficult chapters, a separation, a painful time of pulling apart, and then a finding of each other again. Not like something out of a story. More like two people who genuinely understood what it would cost them to lose what they had. And then came her cancer diagnosis, fear that doesn't belong on a stage, grief that doesn't fit into a set list. Through all of it, they remained side by side. So when this new chapter arrived, it didn't find a man unprepared for hardship. It found someone who already knew how to hold things together when everything wanted to fall. Which is why he didn't look broken up there. Just aware. Present in a way that felt different from before. There's one song people keep returning to. Not the driving anthems, not the early radio staples. Remember when? For a long time it felt uncomplicated, warm, nostalgic, a gentle look back at a life that held. But it doesn't land the same anymore. Now it feels immediate. Like he's standing inside those words as he sings them, not recalling from a distance, but watching it recede in real time. Because somewhere along the way, life stopped being something he could hold in place and became something he had to let move through him. Then came a loss his audience didn't see coming. The death of his son-in-law, Ben Selectman, young, sudden, the kind of grief that resists any framework. Allan had written about heartache his entire career. But no song can ready a father for watching his daughter endure a loss that rewrites her life. That kind of sorrow doesn't stay contained. It moves through everything, through rooms, through silence, through the way people look at each other across a dinner table without knowing what to say. And he kept standing through it. Kept showing up. But if you look carefully, you see a man carrying more than years. You see weight that never fully put itself down. And then comes the part nobody wants to say out loud. The end of the road. Not with a curtain speech or a moment of finality. Just fewer shows, and then fewer still, until one day the space where you always expected to find him is simply quiet. Not retirement, exactly. The end of the place where Alan Jackson became who he was. And perhaps that's why it feels so personal, because for the people who grew up alongside his music, this isn't just an artist stepping back from a stage. It's the sound of something they loved slowly becoming memory. Alan Jackson isn't just leaving the road. He's leaving the place where his voice, his family, his losses, and his American story all became one. And maybe that's why this particular goodbye carries so much weight. Because people aren't simply watching him walk away. They're watching something of themselves go with him. And still, beneath all that quiet, the voice remains. Joe Bonsall passed away at 76. For countless listeners, he wasn't simply a credited performer. He was that distinct tenor climbing above the harmonies, the voice you felt lifting through the Oak Ridge Boys' sound right when it needed to soar. The news came out of Hendersonville, Tennessee, confirmed quietly at first, then moving through the community of people who remembered. If you were around in the late 70s and into the 80s, you heard him whether you consciously registered it or not. Elvira, that deep rolling bass underneath, and then the chorus opening up. Joe was part of that balance. A group sound, yes, but built from individual voices that felt like a family sharing the same front porch. Bobby Sue, American Made, songs that didn't overstay their welcome, they just remained. He had been with the group since 1973. Decades on buses and stages, nights that bleed together over the years. And through it all, that voice stayed honest. Not flawless, real. People who spent time with him offstage described a thoughtful man, well-read, genuinely curious about history and people. You can hear that intentionality in how he sang. Even in the lighter songs, there was always something deliberate behind it. He stepped away not long before the end, health made that call. And perhaps that's part of what gives this news its particular heaviness. The gradual quieting now complete. The harmonies go on playing, as they always do. But something inside them has shifted, just slightly. Art Becker passed away at 84. His wasn't a name that dominated headlines, but if you followed college basketball in the 1960s, particularly out west, you knew the kind of player he was, even if his name has grown quieter with time. Word was confirmed out of Tempe, Arizona, with little noise. That's often how it goes for athletes from that generation. No constant media presence, no highlight reels on every platform. Just the games, the crowds, and the people who showed up faithfully. He stood around 6 feet 7 inches and played as a forward for Arizona State University during an era when college basketball was rawer, less produced, and more physical. You earned your place on that floor. 6 seasons of durability, that tells its own story. Consistency under pressure, showing up when it counted, not just when things were easy. Those were smaller times in the best sense. Arenas you could feel the edges of, radio broadcasts with a bit of static, a newspaper clipping folded into a drawer. That's how players lived in memory back then, not through replays, but through the impressions they left on the people who were actually there. Teammates from those years always described players like him in similar terms: dependable, unshowy, the kind of presence every good team quietly depends on. Then the seasons end. The crowds thin out. Time carries the story forward. But every so often, a name drifts back. Someone brings it up. Someone else nods and says, "Yeah, I remember." And for a moment, it all feels close again.